So clearly, humans in their wisdom have devised a system by which an extremely complicated world can be knocked down into pieces, and by sharing information back and forth, we can all work together and put those pieces together so that each of us, if we have a network, can encompass what we need to encompass without ourselves having to keep up on every single subject, which would clearly be an impossibility. And so our world functions through these wonderful opinion leaders. Now, the interesting point today is that I think Tom Jefferson would approve of this idea, because there are so many subjects that we're all concerned about or need to be concerned about, that in fact most people at one time or another are opinion leaders. In fact, the group over at UNH, Murray Strauss's group over there that studies the American family, has found that opinion leadership today has even come right down to the basic family unit. You know how opinion leadership works. I can't keep up on all the subjects I used to, and you can't keep up on all the subjects you used to, so you take a couple and I take a couple, and then when my subject comes up, I tell you, and when yours comes up, you tell me. It's just this kind of shared networking. Well, this apparently is happening in the family. In fact, Strauss's studies of the supermarket show that when people go to the supermarket, Mom picks the meat. She's kind of the knowledge, she's the expert, the opinion leader on meats. Dad picks the dessert. Of course, we're all experts on that subject. But when you come to the cereal aisle and you start down the aisle with your cart, everybody turns to 6-year-old Susie and says, Susie, what are we eating this week? She says, Cheerios. In the basket they go, and we're on down to the next aisle. Susie is the family opinion leader on cereals. If you think I'm fooling, go to the supermarket, stand at the end of that aisle and watch, and you will see opinion leadership in action. Now, if I want to convince somebody that they ought to buy Cheerios, should I waste my time with Mom and Dad, or should I go straight to Susie? Because she's the one who's going to influence that decision. Well, that's what we're talking about over here. Behavioral public relations essentially means that we realize that what's on the printed page is just part of the process. Even going beyond the printed page, into the hearts and minds of the people, supposedly, again, not the key thing. The key thing is whether we can get into the hearts and minds of opinion leaders, because those opinion leaders then can become role models and influencers that will drive people towards certain behaviors. That, in a very summary way, is what we're talking about when we talk about behavioral public relations. Now, so much for the theoretical base, except for one other point. And I think this is critical for those of us who are practitioners. There's an old rule of the psychologists. If you want to change someone else's behavior, first analyze your own. So as we move through the detail that I want to present you today, just be thinking of how we have to shift our own daily professional behaviors if, in fact, we want to be able to motivate the opinions of others. There are, in fact, 4 specific techniques, having covered the theory, that I'd like to cover in some practical detail, and let me just share them with you. For the daily operations of your organization and mine, I want to talk about customer satisfaction modeling. Customer satisfaction modeling is a proven behavioral technique, and I want to share some information on that. For issues or public external operations, I want to talk about constituency relations, because constituency relations, again, has a good history of being able to motivate actual behaviors of those publics. For working with your fellow managers, for helping the organization make decisions that will push it in the proper directions, I want to talk a little bit about behavioral research, because indeed we have got a problem. And that is that too much, far too much public relations research is nothing more than marketing research warmed over. This means number crunching, it means it means really accepting the idea that there is a mass audience. And if we can just get this percentage of it, certain things will happen. And yet the demographers are telling us there is no more mass audience. So I want to talk a little bit about some techniques that are public relations research techniques which have been shown in a number of cases to be able to lead us toward behaviors. Finally, inside the organization, I want to just touch briefly on that set of techniques that indeed will help us better to pull together our organizations to overcome any disruptions or difficulties. And of course, I'm talking about OD, or organization development techniques. All of this rests actually on one basis that I really should share. And this is the base on which it rests. Every organization is seeking one thing, and that one thing is success. Certainly that's what your organization is after. That's why they have you employed, that's why everybody else is there. But there's a problem with success, and that is that it isn't something you can proclaim unilaterally. You can't suddenly one day jump up and say, I made it, I am a success. You can't even take a vote inside. Hey, are we a success? You know, usually it'll come out at least 75% saying, you bet. But that doesn't make us a success, does it? Success is far more elusive than that. In fact, success has to be conferred on an organization. Conferred. It's not something you can do at all. Somebody else has to say you are a success. But they don't say you are a success, because saying means nothing. They must behave as if you are a success. They must buy. They must vote. They must not raise issues, put roadblocks in your way, and so on and so forth. And so this success has to be conferred behaviorally. Notice that. It has to be conferred behaviorally. And the worst news is it has to be conferred behaviorally by outsiders. Those awful people out there that we don't know, try as we will, that we need to get to know better. We've got to get them to behave in a way that makes us a success. Now, that sounds pretty elusive. Fortunately, because of the disappearance of the mass market, and I would suggest, by the way, that even if it hadn't, this would still be the only way we could achieve this. But as it happens, there is no more mass audience, so it makes it much easier for us to have a formula to get us to making this happen. Here it is. The first thing is we have to move beyond communication into that difficult business of relationships. So that when someone asks you, what do? Don't tell them you're a communicator. Tell them you're a relationship builder. Now, why relationships? And why are relationships different than communications? Well, I should think it would be obvious. Two people, an organization and a group, can communicate pretty regularly for years and years and years, and still there is no relationship. A communication is an intellectual thing. You put together in the forepart of your mind some ideas that you want to convey to someone else. And so you do that. And then they receive those in the foreparts of their brains, and they think about them. And if they wish to respond, they respond with a message out of the cranium again. It's a totally intellectual activity. Furthermore, it occurs in just little snippets of time. And, of course, in an over-communicated world, those little snippets are tougher and tougher to come by. Breaking through that incredible barrier of over-communication, even to get the snippets, is becoming just a super challenge all by itself. And so a communication is this snippet of time. I send a message to you, and gosh, I got lucky, and you received it. It's a snippet. The next 6 or 8 you probably won't receive. You know, the law of averages is against me, unless you're really interested in my subject. And then I'll send another one, and maybe you'll get that, and that's another little snippet. But you see, it's just all these little snapshots. A relationship is different. In a relationship, we take the trouble to go beyond the communication, to actually get to know the individuals involved. And we give them a chance to experience us, our product, our service, our organization. If we're in a school, we don't talk about how good the teaching is. We get the people into the buildings and they meet the instructor. That's how you build a relationship. When people can understand one another's body language, look one another in the eye, and of course have two-way interchanges. And that's, again, the limiting factor of communication. It's a one-way activity. Now, the reason that relationships are the thing that we have to seek is because they are the antithesis of snippets. They go on and on and on. Once you have experienced another person, really gotten to know them a little bit, have you ever noticed how they have a kind of a place in your head, maybe, and in your heart? In other words, you know, you meet somebody and then you don't hear from them for a while, and then maybe somebody brings them up at the party. And what do you immediately say? I know him. You see, there's a relationship there. It's more than just, oh, I wrote him a letter once, or he wrote me a letter once. There's truly a relationship established. And these relationships go on and on and on. And of course, public relations professionals cultivate those relationships so that they indeed go on and on and on, because there's a regular contact, a regular sharing there. Now think about the power of a relationship as opposed to a snippet of communication. If we build relationships with some of these key people out there so that we really know one another, come to understand one another's value systems, there'll still be times when that relationship will be almost ready to fall apart, because you know how relationships are. I mean, they're good sometimes and they're not so good sometimes. And so even if it's at a low period, the relationship is still there. And of course, if it's a high period, you're really hitting on all cylinders together. Now think, suddenly your organization has an opportunity that it wants to exploit. Or indeed, maybe you're under attack. And you have these relationships, even relationships that are strained, you nonetheless have access to those people. And those people have access to you. You've all been through issues and crises. What's the difficulty? It's getting people that you can have access to. Because suddenly when things are bad, hey, do I know you? You know, aren't you the one that's, you know, all over the front page? I'm not sure I know you. But you see, if you have a relationship, that access is there. And if there's strong relationships, it may even go beyond that. In an opportunity situation or an issue, crisis, those people will probably come to you. Certainly if they know you, they will at least give you the benefit of the doubt, a willing suspension of disbelief, as we like to say, and they won't immediately listen to all the scuttlebutt that's out there. They may want to go to the source with you. Now, contrast that with a group with whom you only have a communication situation. Suddenly you're in difficulty, and now you want to send them communications. Are they going to really love to receive these? Are they going to look at them with any skepticality, do you suppose? Kind of like, where were you last week when you weren't in trouble? Now you're in trouble. Boy, you're writing to me. That's the difference. So if we can build relationships, a wonderful thing happens. All the rhetoric about our organizations caring for people is suddenly proven, because we are, in fact, working with them over time in a two-way basis in which they are participating. And if we're sophisticated enough, in which they are co-authoring our policies, our products, our services, our positions, indeed, the democratic ideal becomes real through the building of relationships. However, and this may be the toughest part, when we talk about building relationships, we have to be very careful that we understand what we mean. Because a relationship that in fact is going to work and motivate mutually supportive behaviors has to be built on trust. Now, a trusting relationship means that if we are open with our publics, we are always open with our publics. In other words, when it's good news, we don't just put it all over the place and throw the party. And when it's bad news, suddenly, you know, gee, get the number. I'll try and call them week after next. Because if you're going to be open with people, if you're going to have a relationship, this means you share in good times and bad. It means you don't cut corners. It means you take the trouble to always carry out your policies and your beliefs and live